So maybe very quickly how we're going to be doing this presentation, because as mentioned by Jakob, we are a little bit of a startup, so the presentation itself is not quite as technical as some of the other ones we've seen here. The focus of our talk was really on how did we get to the innovation level that we are at today, and what are the challenges that we have to tackle. How do we see the added value of the Green Fuel Center in companies like ours, which are at an early stage in the development, and which have big ambitions and quite international ambitions, but are still very much focused on that very first startup and early R&D phases. The presentation will be cut into two. I will be taking care of most of the business development side of things, so most of the business challenges and business innovation that we had, and Jaymish will be talking a lot more on the technical innovation side. So without further ado, BioQuest Alliance, turning non-mechanically recyclable plastics, organic waste and biomass into renewable energy, biochemicals and sustainable fuels of the future. It's a pretty big mouthful, but it does summarize the entire package. Essentially, if you want to summarize it in 3 words, we are turning waste into fuels and into energy for tomorrow. James, if you wouldn't mind this slide. So the point of this talk, of this presentation, was really the joint working between business innovation on one hand and technical innovation on the other hand. Starting with a little bit of an illustration here, just what we found is that you can have technical innovation, which can be brilliant, but if it doesn't get productized, if you can't actually do anything with it business-wise, it doesn't really get anywhere. You sort of get this technical level, you hit a ceiling, and once you've hit that ceiling, that's pretty much it. With the business innovation side, the opposite is true. You can get as good of a product as you want, but if you can't actually find new ways to implement it, find new ways to get into this technology market, you don't really get anywhere with your business style. You're going to hit the ceiling with your business, and that's going to be it. So what we have tried to accomplish with BioQuest Alliance in its very early stages so far is the collaboration and sort of the cross-working between, on the one hand side, finding innovative ways of implementing products, and on the other hand side, developing the products to fit new business models and innovating on the technical side of things. So that was pretty much the core idea. If you don't mind, James. So what is BioQuest Alliance in 3 stages? The first stage that we were looking at was plastic waste to traditional oils. We've talked quite a bit about the traditional oil sector in the past. They gave a pretty damn good description of how we are dependent on oil and how we will require oil as a society for the foreseeable future. At the other hand side, we still have quite a large plastic mountain which is floating around the ocean somewhere, not just floating around the ocean, but also floating around the forests and in any sort of environmental area where you're looking at. In Europe, it's quite all right. We've got most of it stored, but even that is not particularly environmentally friendly. So plastic is a problem. If we can tackle plastic, turn it back into traditional oils, at the very least transitional oils, you have quite an improvement of your CO2 and your carbon emissions on the entire life cycle already. In stage 2, we're then looking at biomass and food waste, particularly in the areas of agricultural wastes, vegetables, and any sort of green waste that came with it. Because the point is that we wanted to move from the transitional oils, which have ceiling and which have a lifespan. The new greener oils and the new greener fuel sections are an up-and-coming market. We expect quite a bit of evolution there in the near future. So this is really the future-proofing of the company and the concept that we have. And then in stage 3, we're looking at power generation and innovation. There are multiple ways to extract power out of any particular fuel. It's just a matter of finding the most optimal way of doing so. Unfortunately, in a lot of cases at the moment, that's a carburation engine, so it's a combustion engine. But that's not always the best way to do it environmentally speaking. What we need on that front is further development, further research, and further just plain and simple innovation on how to extract power from the chemicals that we can produce and how we can actually get it into the power grid. So that's what we were looking at in the 3 stages. So what's the challenges that we faced business-wise so far? As a startup company, the first and foremost that we found is that you need to have your concept ready down to a T. Now, I'd like to think that we were ready the first time around we started. The current business plan, the current concept that we're presenting today is, I think, generation 4 of what we originally designed and what we originally got to. The challenge really was in finding, and this is where that co-working between business innovation and technical innovation really comes into play. We had a pretty good technical concept the first time around. It was just that the business innovation, or the business side of things, was not really there. We had to go through a couple of iterations before we got to a point where not only was the technical innovation sound, but also the business innovation was quite in order. We had a business model that could work, that can get financed, and that actually can get off the ground without too much additional questions asked on that particular front once we explain that concept. So this was really the key challenge that we faced, and this is a challenge that is underestimated. There is a very high amount of effort put onto getting things from concept stage to an early prototyping, which is a purely technical innovation. And then there is a lot of effort being placed on getting anything that has already passed prototyping into mass production, where we have this sort of valley of death is in the fact that you have a prototype, you need to develop a prototype, you're going to get to a prototype. But what is that prototype going to do if you don't have a business application for it at that point? So that was really the initial sort of challenges that we faced. How do we get this into a proper business model? How can we get this worked out? And how can we actually do the research required to get us from where we were at that point with a good idea and a good technical concept into a good business concept as well? So we get into, encouraging the innovation itself. There are quite a large amount of incubators. There are quite a large amount of instances that will try to encourage this form of innovation, that will focus on one particular element of the innovations that need to be taken. So one of the innovations that needs to be made is, for example, if we're looking at the technical side, we're looking at a technical innovation, you need to get from a concept idea into an early prototyping stage or into a lab stage. There are multiple incubators and instances capable of doing that. On the other hand side, in business innovation, you will get courses, you will have workshops, you have various institutions that will aid you into developing a business model. The thing is that all of these only focus on that particular front. Very rarely is there a combination being made between, on the one hand side, develop your technology, and on the other hand side, develop your business alongside it. And that is from where we are standing as a startup company at the moment, the largest challenge that we had to overcome really. We had the technology, we had a concept, but matching the two and actually developing it to a stage that it became financeable, that it became actionable, was a challenge. And that is a point where initiatives like the Green Fuel Center really can play a part, in that they can add in the academic knowledge and match it with industry life. And that was what we were, well, if this was around when we first started, I would have really loved to utilize it as an incubator, well, as a center that we could utilize to develop our own concept. And lastly, we have global networking. It's often underestimated how important internationalization is in early stage concepts. The general tendency that we found and that we met was really try to stay local, try to get one thing off the ground, and try to develop it locally as well as you can. The problem with that attitude is that the problems that we are facing are not local. The plastic itself, just stage one, is an international problem on any scale you imagine it. If you look at it just on, we're a Belgian company, if you look at it just on the Belgian scale, you maybe solve a little bit of the entire issue, but you're not really going to have made a dent into the overall global issue with plastics. If you're looking at organic waste, the same thing applies. If you look at it on a local scale and only on a local scale, you run into walls very fast. So what we needed and what we would really advocate is that the network and the way that it's being looked at to these innovative companies, to startups in our category and in this entire industry, is that you start looking at it globally, seeing what can the impact be on a global problematic scale, on the global scale of the problem. How can we make sure that plastics don't get shipped into Indonesia to be dumped over there? How can we actually take care of handling the waste streams that we are seeing and the emissions that we are seeing on a global scale, and that requires international cooperation. So on that front, utilizing companies and startups from across the globe and from across multiple countries is the only way forward if you want to get new and truly innovative technologies deployed in Europe and in the rest of the world. So that was pretty much the business side of things that we were facing, and just big concept global elements that we were looking at. Going into a little bit more detail on the technical challenges that we faced is going to be Jaymish, who is currently doing our head chemical research and chief R&D officer. He's going to take you through a lot more of the technical motions, but before we get into that, I want to just leave you with the last idea of you have the technology. If you have the technology, find a way to deploy it, find a way to productize it. And if you take away nothing else from this presentation, my part at least today, that's the thing that I wanted to emphasize really is there is technology, there is business, but if you have good technology and you don't have a good model to deploy it, it's not really going to work out. So for those kind of things, we really need these cross sector initiatives where we are talking about both the technology and the business in one room. Thank you very much, Jaymish. Over to you.
Thank you, Wouter. And yeah, and also thank you ever so much to Jakob and Kristin for inviting us to be a part of this kickoff event. It's been a privilege and to be a part of this. So thank you very much. Well, we all know innovation flourishes when sectors and industries converge. When actors and stakeholders, such as large businesses like OMV or Clariant, and universities and research institutes like the Green Fuel Centre, collaborates at the beginning of the research innovation process, along with policymakers and the local community, creativity and trust in science and innovation increases. So it's great to be a part of an event that has brought together players and representatives from these organisations. So to delve into the bottlenecks, I'd rather like to call them the challenges that we have faced. It has boiled down to 4 or 5 as I'll elucidate further. Really, the first one is red tape and the bureaucracy involved in the permits and the licenses to acquire the permits and licenses, and how timely, time-consuming, complex, and costly it is for startups to enter the market and really make a go of innovating and commercializing the technology. The second one is also predominantly for anyone who's looking to start out or start a spin-off from the Green Fuel Centre or TUM directly. It is early stage financing and how to obtain and the relevant or how to go by the relevant avenues to obtain and acquire early stage financing. So really, it is not, well, 20 to 30 years ago, it was probably enough to go to your local bank and present your business plan. But nowadays, with VCs, angels, and even grant funding bodies, they like to look at LOIs and contracts with suppliers and buyers, and the actual nuts and bolts of your business and how you're going to thrive within the market, and de-risking the whole nature of your business. So that's effectively what we're at a stage where we have de-risked the major parts of our organization, and in the final stages of acquiring the early stage financing. But again, it's a long process, and you have to just stick at it. And really the major challenges and the bottlenecks involved in scaling up, and how we can take a concept from a laboratory or pilot scale and really commercializing that technology from a TRL3 to all the way up to a TRL6. And it's vital for companies like us to establish cooperations with the Green Fuel Centre to allow us to bridge the gap and effectively cross the chasm, as Geoffrey Moore elaborated on in his book. And again, in the future, this is something we'd like to help other startups with in terms of scaling up their technologies and how they can overcome the challenges from TRL3 or a demonstrator all the way up to full-scale commercial operations. And the major one that people do let fall by the wayside is customer adoption, and bringing on board your early stage customers and adopters early on within the process, and effectively addressing the customer's needs and how it provides a meaningful purpose to them. So yeah, effectively reaching out to your customers at early stage is a vital part of the process, rather than focusing your resources and efforts on improving the product. It's bringing along your end users and customers at the beginning phase of your project. But for me, the most fundamental factor are the people involved, not only the financial backers and your suppliers and the buyers, but also the talent. So yeah, it is vital for the likes of OMV, MTU, Clariant to establish links and ties to universities and research institutes such as the Greenfield Centre to access the talent and the knowledge and expertise within the buildings, and to effectively drive and commercialize their technology. And also, again, to be a highly competitive and innovative company, it pays to be diverse and have that diverse mindset and bring different sets of experiences and skills along to the project. And really, to delve into the actual needs of the R&D and fundamental research, it is about collaboration and bringing on board different kinds of sets of skills and expertise and opinions, engaging the public and local communities, as well as even social organizations at the beginning and ideation phase of your design processes will really help to advance the comprehension of your fundamental research area and help to address global challenges such as the climate crisis, which will benefit and provide value to society in general. And again, we also look to try to embed the UN Sustainable Goals and how that will affect our future R&D propositions. So, for example, the human sustainability element, how we can find or how we can develop the skills of data analysts, engineers, researchers, and scientists to help us provide value to communities, and really how they can help us to source the raw materials in a more effective and efficient manner. And again, finally, I'd like to pass over the expectations of future markets for the business side of things and what we're expecting from waste fuels to energy to Wouter, and then I'll delve into the technical elements as well.
Thank you very much, Jaymish. So in general, there are two main expectations that we are having for the future markets in our industry development. For starters, on the plastic waste fuel, in the very short term, we expect quite a large boom in pyrolysis oil and in anything related to breaking down plastics and carbohydrates back into their core components and moving that as an alternate fuel service. And then on the other hand side, in the mid to long term, we expect to go more into a boom of the organic waste and into the real green and food wastes into fuels.
Sorry, guys, you stretched time quite
Yep.
a bit.
No.
Before you do too many changes, can you please
Yeah.
speed up a bit?
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, this is just the final part. Yeah, really, the expectations of future markets, it'll be great to have a crystal ball. But from what we gather, it will be very much dependent on regulation and policy from local municipalities and local governments. But yeah, we have to take the example of wind and solar and how they've reduced their production costs, and how renewable fuel industry and the renewable energy industry in general can help pave the way towards reducing the production costs and raw material costs, and how that can help the industry thrive. And with that, yeah, we are finished. I'm happy to take any questions.